The way that we care for the sick and dying has evolved a great deal over the last 1,000 years. While our knowledge has increased at a phenomenal pace, some wisdom may have been lost along the way. This program will guide us back through a sequence of world events, manuscripts, and historical characters to help us rediscover an old way of looking at life and death, at pain and suffering. Perhaps in our quest to create better lives through science and technology, we might benefit from contemplating the ancient as well.
Well, the modern problem is, and it's our blessing and curse at the same time, is that we have more information than ever before, probably of any group in history. But that information doesn't mean more wisdom necessarily. And that distinction, I think, is really important. Wisdom is the ability to take information and artfully apply it. It's a skill set, the art of living, the art of dying. And information alone doesn't guarantee that. And I think in the ancient wisdom traditions, the books of living and dying, the emphasis is less on the concrete skills. They're there sometimes. But more importantly, it's on how those get applied. So that there's this library in human history where almost regardless of the period of time or culture, there is something like an ancient book of living and dying. Back in the time of the Egyptians, the Tibetan book of living and dying that we've become familiar with in recent years, the monastic books of dying in the West, and that in spite of the differences between these cultures and perspectives, there's a thread of continuity. There's some kind of common ground wisdom that we wanted to pull out and see perhaps would have some advice and wisdom in applying to the situation today at the bedside for the hospice patient or just for people in general in life. In the monasteries in the early 11th century, when this whole ars moriendi, or art of living and dying tradition was born, there were a couple of amazing insights that they discovered, or perhaps they inherited from other traditions that were already around in Europe at that time. One that was key is that it's the dying who are our teachers. Again, I don't come in with the answers. The one who leads the dance, in a way, is the person who's in the sickbed. And their belief was that the sickbed wasn't just a place of suffering. It was a place of potential transformation. Now, the way they approached that is to not come in with a one-size-fits-all model. It wasn't a manual approach where this person has this kind of illness, therefore we will apply this kind of medicine or spiritual practice. Instead, it was, and the term they used was prescriptive, meaning that I would study what the individual needs of this patient at this time are, and then prescribe something just tailored exactly to that situation. Dame Cicely Saunders. What an amazing influence she's been on this whole shift that's happening, not just in hospice care. We certainly give her credit for that contribution, but I think potentially in terms of how we approach illness and suffering and how we manage pain. She was aware of these ancient books of living and dying, and especially she was aware of those monastic traditions that I've spoken about. And she knew that this was more than just paying attention to the physical. You do that, but at the same time, underneath it, how a person is within themselves became for her the whole question. If I was to sum up this early medieval monastic tradition that came out of a sense of medicine, again, that was more than information, it was also the wisdom and the art of its application, I would say there was a belief that among the sick and the suffering and the dying, they believed God could make doctors.
Ancient wisdom was not confined to one culture or location. In fact, part of what created ancient wisdom was the coming together of the best ideas from different corners of the world.
For some reason, at the turn of the last millennium, 1000 AD, there was an interest in death and dying, unprecedented in Europe anyway. It had been happening in other parts of the world previously. And I think there were probably a couple of reasons for that. One was times were tough. We're coming out of the so-called Dark Ages, the average life expectancy being so poor. And we're just about to go into the time of the Great Plague and massive death. But it wasn't all driven by negative or reactive factors. There was something also very proactive and positive going on at this period of time. And it's related to the flow of 4 different streams of influence into Europe that had been happening for some centuries, but now around 1000 AD really begin to coalesce or converge. The 4 streams are, first of all, from the Middle East. That tradition, the Roman trade routes going back to ancient times, brought influences into Europe from Asia. From the Greco-Roman world comes probably the dominant cultural influence of Europe. From Iberia, we have a whole nother tradition that's brought in across Africa, including the influence of Islam. And then from the Celtic lands, we have a 4th kind of cultural perspective. And in those medieval monastic infirmaries, something began to happen in the art of living and dying that brought those influences together in creative ways. One of the reasons, undoubtedly, was because patients in those infirmaries, especially in southern parts of Europe, were often Muslim, Jewish, and of course Christian. And they had to find a kind of common language to support these people. The prime directive in these infirmaries was not to force convert someone, but really to provide medicine and to not let a person be alone in their suffering. Well, they found 2 common ground sources that became an ingenious part of their wisdom tradition. One was the book of Psalms, and the other was the book of Job. In fact, the tradition was that if you had those books in either hand, you would really have all of the wisdom, I would say today, the psychological and spiritual astuteness necessary to help someone in their suffering. Both of those books are remarkable in not shying away from the depth of human misery, but finding the possibility of transformation in that. And because Jews and Christians and Muslims all respected those books as holy books, as scripture, they would find ways to use those as kind of medicines in the infirmaries, not just for the dying, but really for anybody who is struggling with illness and with life in general.